Report from the Statehouse, a weekly unrehearsed news conference with a member of the state administration of Governor Robert Orr. Now your host, Jim Lockwood.
Hello, we're glad to have you with us for this edition of Report from the Statehouse, which is program number 720 in our public affairs series from WTTV television. Indiana Lieutenant Governor John Mutz, one of the major architects of the Orr administration's economic development plans for the state, is our special guest for this week's program. The Lieutenant Governor will be interviewed by three newsmen in our Indianapolis studio, including Ken Owen of WIBC Radio in Indianapolis, Rich Green of WTTV News, and David Rohn of the Indianapolis News. And the first question for Lieutenant Governor John Mutz will be from David Rohn.
Governor Mutz, in this session of the Indiana General Assembly, there's a real disparity of opinion about what to do about Indiana's economic development. Governor Orr obviously has made his proposal for a long-range plan to bring about the creation of new jobs in Indiana. The Democrats have responded with a proposal for a more immediate works program to immediately put people to work. What's your avocation on either course of action and why?
Well, I talked with several of the members of the Democratic Party last night, and I indicated to them that we're interested in creative ideas and jobs that are likely to be with us for a long period of time.
Ken Owen?
Well, Governor, obviously education would be a big part of the economic redevelopment program, and it's been said, I guess our seasonally adjusted unemployment rate is now 14% of the state. It's been said that perhaps one of the reasons Indiana has one of the highest unemployment rates in the nation right now is because we have been lagging behind in education. Do you see education as a prominent factor in economic development?
Well, without any question, we are coming into an era now in which the emphasis in economics is going to change from one of adding value to physical things. And value is now going to be measured against a concept of information and the ability to manipulate that information. Now, this is a very difficult concept for a lot of people to grasp, but it seems to be with us. And what that means, of course, is that those people who are going to be employable, those people who are going to have something to add to society are going to have more training, more knowledge of the world in the terms of the big picture of the world than they've ever had in the past. And I think that then makes it pretty clear that commitments in education are an important part of any state's current economic development program. And I'm talking about certain aspects of our program for the regular school system, that is kindergarten through the 12th grade, vocational education, and then a special look at the kind of contribution that the institutions of higher education can make as far as economic development is concerned. They're all going to be important, and none can be overlooked.
Rich Green.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about going after high-tech jobs for Indiana. What's it going to take before we can attract those kind of industries in large numbers to our state?
Well, first of all, we need to clarify what we mean by high-tech. Again, I don't know of any state that's done it quite the way we're doing it. So those are Indiana approaches.
Well, do you see any legitimacy to a skeptical taxpayer concern that what all this amounts to is businesses playing one state off against the other for the highest bidder?
Well, there is some valid criticism in that regard. It's my conviction that we don't want any state to walk over us. We're as good as any, and we want to be competitive in that regard.
Ken Owen.
Governor, I think you've made it clear that we're looking for a plan that will lend itself to long-term economic recovery, and perhaps though the average viewer right now is saying to himself, I'm out of work, I need a job. When is this going to take hold? When are we going to start seeing some changes?
Well, of course, the average viewer isn't in that situation because we still have, just over 86% of the people who are employed. But it is true that many of these programs are difficult for many people to justify. For example, the unemployed person who says, you're going to spend all this money on research, I'm unemployed, I need something now. What's that do for me? And I recognize that is a very tough connection to make. But the fact is that one of government's big problems in this country for the last 20 years has been its inability to plan in the long run. Now, when I say long run, I'm not talking about 50 years, I'm talking about 10 years. You know, in politics, we all tend to make our programs fit a 2-year cycle or a 4-year cycle, depending on where we stand for re-election. Well, the fact of the matter is that these programs, many of them, will not have their major impact until after the term of office that Governor Orr and I are involved in. We think we're at that point in our history where we have to make these investments in the future. And we have to do a good job of selling the public on why it needs to be done at this particular time. And I've been very pleasantly surprised by how really intelligent the people of Indiana are. They recognize that more of our people need to go to college than have gone in the past. They recognize that vocational training for many people is an absolute necessity in the future. I think they recognize that the world will never be the same, and that many of those jobs that they've become so accustomed to won't be there. They just won't come back. And once that stark reality sets in, they realize that this is not one of those things that you can cure with a 6-month employment program or some kind of a quick public works program, because we're talking about a fundamental change in the structure of the economy itself. And that's far different than the kinds of ups and downs that we have noted in the past 30 years. So if you had row crops, corn, soybeans, and hogs, you had a pretty decent year. The people who have the difficulty are those that have all their eggs, so to speak, in one basket. We think one of the answers is a diversification of activity on Indiana farms as they tend to get larger in size. And of course, that's what's happening. The average size of the farm is getting slightly larger each year.
Well, why should the state invest in business and industry, not invest that way in the farm economy?
Oh, well, of course, we already do invest substantially in the farm economy. There is a $7 million plus appropriation in the state budget to the Ag Experiment Station at Purdue University and the Bernards Harbor Port.
Ken Owen?
Governor, Hoosiers have been paying higher sales and income taxes now for 3 weeks. And at last report, our projected budget deficit for the state was $463 million. The prognosis at this point for achieving or getting our budget back in the black during this fiscal year, and are the taxes going to do the job? I guess that's basically the question.
Yeah. Well, the early indications are that we will be in the black at end of June 30th of 1983. The early indications are that the alterations in the tax system and the substantial cutbacks in expenditures that were ordered by Governor Orr will in fact make the system work, and that we will meet our constitutional mandate to balance the budget. There is some doubt, obviously, about what's going to happen in the second half of 1983. And the degree of recovery that takes place at that time will determine how well the cash flow works. I think there are still going to be several months of difficult cash flow periods for the state until we finally see enough money to make all of the ends meet the way that they're supposed to. But generally speaking, we seem to be in a position in which we can ride through this period.
Rich Great?
This week, Japanese Prime Minister Nakasone was in Washington talking with President Reagan about our policy as far as trade goes. What's your opinion about United States trade policy? The automobile industry would like to see more restrictions, but the agriculture industry stands to suffer if Japan goes through with its threats to stop buying so many crops if we do that.
The foreign trade policy of the United States is a very complex question. That's what goals are for.
Ken Owen?
Governor, as I think our discussion has indicated, economic proposals will dominate the current session of the General Assembly. But looking beyond the economic proposals, what other pieces of legislation do you see being passed or at least discussed thoroughly that might be very important?
Well, in this session, if you can assume that the education initiatives that Governor Orr suggested are related to economic development but still separate, I think those will be important. And of course, included in that are some things that have not been as thoroughly debated as they will be before the session ends, but they have to do with all this effort to increase the quality of our public education system. And included in the question of quality is it appropriate, for example, to provide special incentives for teachers? Now, the program itself provides some special incentives to encourage the movement of teachers into special fields where we feel there may be a shortage. It also provides some selective incentives of one kind or another, but it doesn't really finally reach that conclusion about how we reward teachers who really do a job. And I think one of the benefits of the governor's program and his commission on primary and secondary education is that it is now beginning to air one of those most important elements of our public education system, and that is how do we in fact reward really good teachers. It has to be, in my opinion, something over and above and different than what we've been doing as far as the past is concerned. That's one element of debate in the session. There'll be considerable interest in strengthening the laws that affect the use of alcohol and motor vehicles. That is, I think the legislature is likely to toughen those laws even more than they've been toughened in the past. Another issue that always is difficult to justify in the public's mind is large expenditures for correctional facilities in our state. And of course that's a direct result of a public outcry that was heard everywhere 8, 9, 10 years ago. There's too much crime. We want you to really crack down on criminals.
Governor?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. We're out of time.
All right.
Appreciate you being here. Lieutenant Governor John Mutz has been our guest for this week's edition of Report from the State House. For the Lieutenant Governor and for our panel of newsmen, this is Jim Lockwood. Thank you for being with us, and we hope you'll join us again next week for another edition of Report from the State House.
Report from the State House is a copyrighted production of WTTV News.